Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here for another session of Encounter Daily. My name's Shane. I'm thrilled to be here. We are going to hop in and grab just one more bite-sized piece of the Bible, one more chapter, and make ourselves available to encounter Jesus today. And in this way, we're going to go through the entire New Testament in about a year at just 25 minutes a time. Anybody can do that. And today we're going to be looking at Matthew 17. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. There's a lot of material in Matthew 17. For those of you who've been with us on this journey, every single chapter has so much more than we can unpack in just 25 minutes. But I'm actually going to unpack less today, even than usual. There are several stories, several episodes, and I might comment on them briefly, but I'm going to camp out on just one story. And I think that this story has the potential to completely transform our lives with Jesus today. No exaggeration. It is that immediate and practical. So here we see behavior on the part of the disciples and instruction on the part of Jesus that if we devote ourselves to it, brings us into profound depth of relationship with our Creator and quite literally makes everything possible. So when we get to that, I'm going to camp out on it and almost ignore everything else. So that should be exciting. And my apologies if I'm going to skip one of your favorite Bible stories. Before I get started, let me hop into chat and say good morning to Hawkeye and to Susanna and to Niney Hammond. Dakoa, good morning. I'm excited to share this bit of the scriptures with you. So let's go. Oh, also, maybe, you know how I am. I might get long-winded unintentionally, but maybe by this approach, we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. I'll actually be able to get into chat and see what you guys are talking about. So if I'm blowing by something, put a question in chat about it if you have it, and I'll try to get to it. All right. So let's begin. Here is Matthew 17. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then, there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And I love Peter's reaction here. You ever been in a situation where you feel like, wow, this is a situation in which I really should say something, and then you say it and you're like, oh, that was so stupid. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you want, I'll put up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And I can almost picture James and John going, I don't know, maybe I put too much into this. But while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud says, This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Now, haven't we heard that before? Yes, we have. When Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, not because he needed a baptism, but for reasons that, hey, if you happen to skip Matthew 3, be a great reason to go back there. But he gives this affirmation to Jesus in the sight of everybody that this is my son. So this incredible message of identity for Jesus to take in and draw upon as a source of strength, he does it again. Why does he do it again? I think he does it again now because Jesus is about to enter into a season that's the culmination of everything that he came to do, and it's going to be hard. And so another message of affirmation from the Father to the Son. So when the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. One question that maybe we could address really, really fast. Why, in this moment of encouragement, does the Father select two figures from the past to speak with Jesus? He selects Moses and Elijah. As typical, the answer to that question is, I'm not sure, but we can look at, to the Jewish nation, what did these two people represent? Well, Moses was the law. It was through Moses that God gave the 10 Commandments and all the fullness of the law. And it was through Elijah. Elijah was considered the greatest of the prophets. And so here we have the law and the prophets coming together in Jesus. And Jesus, elsewhere in Matthew, I can't remember the address, so I'm not going to wait. It's not coming. Anyway, elsewhere, Jesus says, I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've come to fulfill them. So here we have the representative of the law and the prophets coming to Jesus, who is their fulfillment. It's like these two guys were looking forward into the future, straining forward to the moment where all of their life's work would reach fulfillment. And here it is in Jesus. And Jesus has the opportunity to commune with them. I'm doing exactly what I said I wouldn't do. I'm talking too much. I want to get to this story. So I'm going to continue. The disciples asked him, why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Having just seen Elijah, maybe it was on their mind. Jesus replied, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. And then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. If you remember back in Matthew 3, again, great reason to go back there and check this out. There were scriptures talking about the coming of the Messiah, and that before he came, there would be a herald, someone who would announce his coming and make straight his paths. And it makes clear that this person is coming in the spirit of Elijah. The teachers of the law who knew the Jewish scriptures backwards and forwards were looking for Elijah himself, because that's who the scripture said would come to herald the coming of the Messiah. But instead, someone in the spirit of Elijah comes, and that's John the Baptist. Anyway, we are to the story that I want to really camp out on. So grab some popcorn, get something to drink, because here we go. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. Often he falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. You unbelieving and perverse generation, Jesus replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, why couldn't we cast the demon out? He replied, because you have so little faith. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. But nevertheless, this kind only goes out by prayer and fasting. So here Matthew recounts the story, which on the surface level seems to be about Jesus casting out a demon that the disciples couldn't cast out. Of course, there's a lot more going on here. But one thing that hits me in this story before we get to any of the deep practical stuff that I've been talking about is just the profound tragedy of the situation. I mean, here we've got this father watching his son go through what is quite literally hell on earth. I mean, to lose your son is bad, but in this case, the father is watching his son go through a living hell. The same story is recorded in Mark 9, And we can pick up some additional details there. In Mark, Jesus asks this father, how long has this been going on? And the father says that it's been going on since childhood. And even though this translation, what we just read, uses the word boy, that can actually mean teenager or even young adult. So this has been going on for maybe a decade, maybe even more. This whole family's life has been destroyed. Like every waking moment has been centered around the management of this dearly loved son who at any moment could be forced to become violent or throw himself into the water or into the fire. I mean, it's a living nightmare that has gone on and on. And if you remember back in Matthew 6, we talked about our kingdom mission as followers of Jesus, as he laid it out while teaching his followers how to pray. It's in what we now call the Lord's Prayer. And he taught us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. On earth as it is in heaven. That is the high and beautiful calling for all of us who choose to follow Jesus. That amazingly, he chooses to partner with us through our efforts, through our prayers, through our faith, through our devotion. We can play a role in bringing the reality of heaven here on earth. It's amazing. But we can literally bring heaven itself into our lives, into situations, into relationships, into the spaces where we're given influence. And I believe that the Bible actually tells us to work towards and expect doing this into cities and into nations. It's an amazing calling. But what we see here is a great picture of what our enemy's goal is. Our enemy and all of the foul spiritual entities that are aligned with him are all working to bring hell on earth. And it's exactly on the scale that I described. The enemy is working to bring hell on earth into your life, my life, into individual lives, into situations, relationships, into communities and cities and ultimately nations. And we've all seen glimpses of that. And I think this is a really critical reality check for all of us. I mean, I have never seen a time in popular culture and entertainment, especially movies and television, where we have seen so many sympathetic or even positive portrayals of the devil and of demons. I mean, it's all over the place. There's even a recent TV series that went 6 full seasons called Lucifer, where the devil has gotten bored with heaven. He's now actually running a bar, and he's a pretty cool and sympathetic guy. And the reality of this passage is here to remind us that there is nothing fascinating or cool or endearing about our spiritual enemy. He would love for us to fall into that trap, but his whole desire for existence is suffering and torment and death. So there you go. I'll get off my soapbox and continue. So this agonized father comes pleading to Jesus because his disciples have not been able to free his son from this demon. And Jesus' reaction is perplexing for sure. He says, "Oh, you unbelieving and perverse generation, how long will I put up with you? How long must I stay with you?" I mean, at first glance, it seems super harsh. And not in line at all with the compassion that we're used to seeing from Jesus. And I think sometimes my instinct in situations like this is to try to explain it away. And well, surely Jesus didn't mean what he said there. But Jesus said all sorts of perplexing and challenging things. And we've got to get used to wrestling with those. So let's just ask, what if Jesus really meant what he said? That from his vantage point, this generation is unbelieving and perverse, and he's really sick of putting up with it, and he wishes he didn't have to be there anymore. I mean, it sounds intense. But to turn up the volume even more, let's talk about what that word generation meant. For us, it's a horizontal slice of humanity. All the people who were born at around the same time, who were living at around the same time. But in a Middle Eastern sense, at that time, the word that has been translated in our Bibles as generation has a much more vertical sense than a horizontal sense. It was more about source than time. So Jesus very well could have been saying, all of you from the same source which would have been Adam and Eve, the very first to be contaminated by this enemy. All of you from the same source are, from my vantage point, unbelieving and perverse, and right now I'm super frustrated. And what really helps me understand this level of frustration on Jesus' part is what brings him to this point. He's not ticked off at the disciples' performance, like they really screwed it up here, they should have done better. I think he's emotionally moved by the suffering of a child. And in this one suffering child, he sees this a gut punch, of a picture of everything that's gone wrong from the time of Adam and Eve and all the sin and rebellion and evil, all encapsulated for him in the agony of a father and his child, and it's just overwhelming. I mean, there's nothing wrong or sinful on Jesus' part about being frustrated. And when you look at it like this, I think I get it. But here's what's beautiful about Jesus and his character. In his anger and frustration, he acts in compassion. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but in my anger and frustration, more often than not, I act in ways that I regret, ways that hurt people, but Jesus doesn't. He heals the boy. And it's easy to just rush on from that, but in this moment, the suffering and agony of an entire family comes to an end, and they have life and hope and a future, all because of Jesus. That's how Jesus acts when he's frustrated. He's so good. He's so kind. So I'm sure in the aftermath of this miracle, there was celebration. The text made clear that there was a huge crowd gathered. I'm sure it was a giant moment. And you just got to imagine in that moment, there are the disciples just watching. I'm sure when the Father brought his Son to them, they were moved by compassion. They wanted to help. And also, yeah, I'm guessing that on a purely human level, they wanted to be the ones to perform the miracle. If you remember, in Matthew 10, Jesus gave his 12 disciples the power and authority in his name to do the things that up until that moment, only Jesus could do. And he sent these knuckleheads out to heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons, and proclaim the kingdom. And they did it. And when they returned to him, they were so excited. Of course, I sure would be. And their reaction to this situation makes it seem to me like Jesus had not withdrawn that power from them. In fact, it seems like Jesus had an expectation of them that they had everything they needed to be able to cast out this demon, and yet weren't able to. So in this post-deliverance celebration, you can kind of imagine the disciples standing around the crowd. What are they thinking? Like, what are they feeling? Maybe I'm projecting a little bit too much into the story, but if it was me, I'd feel embarrassed. If I'm being honest, I might feel humiliated. Maybe I'd feel jealous. Sounds terrible, but it's true. I sure would be disappointed. Like Jesus led me to expect a certain thing, and then it didn't happen for me. And so there's either something wrong with me or something wrong with Jesus, and I don't like either of those options. And how many times do we find ourselves in that same situation? We have an expectation of how a situation should play out because we're following Jesus. And then it totally doesn't happen. And we're left wondering and struggling and trying to figure out where to put the blame. And all too often end up disappointed in Jesus and doubting this whole thing. I know I'm not the only one like this. And here we see the disciples do what may be the best thing they ever did in following Jesus. Instead of letting those questions and doubts and feelings fester and turn into unbelief and resentment and bitterness, they pulled Jesus aside. They got alone with Jesus and they asked him, what happened? I mean, it's so simple that we can overlook it, but I think this is perhaps the greatest key to enduring in life with Jesus. This life that is so full of adventure and purpose and joy, but that is also fraught with challenges and pain. We can very quickly become fixated on what Jesus isn't doing. I mean, we've been tasked with this mission that we cannot possibly do on our own, bring the reality of heaven to earth. And there are going to be times that despite our best effort, despite our deepest desires, despite our purest intentions, our most heartfelt affections, there's going to be times where it just doesn't happen. times where the miraculous healing doesn't come, or the relationship isn't mended, or the finances don't show up, or the deliverance doesn't happen, or the breakthrough doesn't break through. And in these moments, we've really only got two options. We can let that situation lead to unbelief, or we can choose to take that situation to Jesus. And here, for all their faults, we see the disciples model the life-giving choice. And in their humility, Jesus gives them an answer. Although in typical Jesus fashion, there's certainly mystery involved. Jesus is going to talk to them about faith, which is critically important, but a super mysterious subject. If we're living in the kingdom of God, then you can consider faith the currency of that kingdom. It's the stuff by which everything gets done. And frankly, in my opinion, I've not heard a theologian say this, it seems to be that all of our life here on this earth is about manufacturing faith. It's what God seems to value most in us as we work to grow closer to Him and to grow to be more like Him. In Hebrews 11, we read that without faith, it's impossible to please God. So one thing that we learn really quickly as we follow Jesus and partner with Him in this kingdom mission is that really every situation we find ourselves is an invitation to exercise faith. It's like this whole 70, 80, 90 years that we're given here on this earth is really just time in the gym, in the spiritual workout room to exercise faith. So Jesus tells the disciples that they weren't able to bring deliverance for this kid because of their lack of faith, and lets them know that if they had faith, even the size of a mustard seed, that they could tell mountains to move and they would go, nothing would be impossible for them. Now, in context, even if you don't understand the agriculture around it, you can guess the point Jesus is trying to make and understand that a mustard seed surely is not very big. And yeah, I looked it up. It's just 1 or 2 millimeters. It's so tiny. Which leads me to believe that when Jesus says it was because of their lack of faith, He's not actually talking about an amount. I mean, is Jesus really saying that there's some fractional amount of faith south of the 1 millimeter size of a mustard seed, and that's what the disciples had, but it didn't reach that 1 millimeter size, and so it wasn't enough? I mean, I know Jesus is speaking metaphorically here, but his whole point seems to be that you don't need much faith. And at the same time, he was telling them that they didn't have enough. And I don't know, but it makes me wonder if maybe he was talking about placement of faith. I mean, maybe the disciples had faith. They had been sent out with this power and authority, and they'd seen results, and they'd returned triumphantly. And so maybe they approached this demon-possessed kid thinking, no problem. I've done that, been there, done that. I've got this. And then it didn't happen. Maybe the issue was that their faith was in themselves and in their abilities rather than in Jesus. Maybe what Jesus is saying is that it only takes the tiniest amount of correctly placed faith to move mountains. I don't know. Like I said, this is mysterious. And I wrestle on a daily basis with what is faith? What does it mean? How do I walk in faith and grow in faith and partner with Jesus in faith? But that explanation seems to be consistent with the point that Jesus makes in closing out this section. Jesus says, this kind only comes out with prayer and fasting. Essentially, this kind of demon. Essentially, whatever this specific type of evil spiritual being was, you're not going to have victory over it without prayer and fasting. And at first glance, that seems kind of formulaic, like something that you can put on your checklist, like, oh, we've got us a category 3 demon here. I need to come back after I've done some prayer and fasting, and then I can handle it. But that kind of mindset leads us to faith in ourselves, not in Jesus. Like, to get the result we want, we have to do the right things, and it's all on us. But I think the answer is in the reality that Jesus kicks this demon out. He says, this type only comes out with prayer and fasting, and then he himself kicked it out. So the implication is that Jesus has been praying and fasting. Now, does that mean that Jesus knew he was going to be facing this demon and he cranked out some prayer and fasting so he'd be ready? Maybe. I doubt it. I think That's something we see in the scriptures all over, especially in the book of Luke. We'll see that when we get there, is that Jesus consistently prioritized time to be alone and in communion with his Father. Jesus practiced prayer and fasting as a lifestyle, and not because they were items on a checklist, but because prayer and fasting leads to intimacy with God. So I don't think it's a stretch for us to conclude that what Jesus is saying is there's certain battles that you're just not going to win unless you are fighting from a position of profound and ongoing intimacy with God. So Jesus himself, as our ideal and teacher, modeled this for us. Yes, absolutely, in every way, Jesus was God. But remember, by an act of his own will, he laid all the perks of divinity aside and decided to live fully as a man. And in that state, everything Jesus did was through the power of the Holy Spirit and was born from the wellspring of his intimacy with the Father. And that's the life I believe he was pointing his disciples towards in this moment and is pointing us towards right now. And again, making clear that he knew himself to be God, Jesus pointed to this same reality again to skip ahead to John 15. I'm not going to rob from John 15 too much because there's so much there. But he told his disciples, if you remain in me and I in you, you'll bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So he's saying to these disciples who just failed to do what they felt like they ought to do, apart from me, you can do nothing. The implication, I believe, is that they were trying to do some things apart from Jesus. And it's so easy for you and me to do the same thing and not even realize it, not even realize that this step of faith that used to be big for us, now we kind of feel like, yeah, been there, done that. And we can move on in our own strength and forget that apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. So there's just so much in just that one little interaction. Wow, I'm already over time. Dang it. I'm gonna shoot for the end. Okay, when they came together in Galilee, he said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him. And on the third day, he will be raised to life. And the disciples were filled with grief. That's just fascinating. That over and over, beginning right now, actually, Jesus begins predicting what's going to happen, that he's going to die and will be raised to life. And the disciples never understand it. Even though he said, I'll be killed and on the third day I'll be raised to life, it looks like the first part of that sentence so threw them that they couldn't even consider the second part. Out of time, running on. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and said, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Yes, he does, he replied. I get the sense that he's not quite sure. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. What do you think, Simon? He asked. From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others? From others, Peter answered. Then the children are exempt, Jesus said to him. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and for yours. I would love to dig into that. The most important point that needs to be made here, and that's all I'll do, is again we see Jesus's full understanding that he is the Son of God. Because what he's saying here is, in this metaphor of kings and their children, this is the temple tax we're talking about here. Well, the king of the temple, the Lord of the temple, is God the Father himself. And what he's saying is, essentially, Do I need to pay the tax? Because I am the son. So am I not exempt from it? So again, very clearly, Jesus knew who he was, and he said it over and over in many different ways that he was the Son of God, and in every meaningful way, he had equality with God. All right, so I am over time. I'm going to look at chat just a little bit. Yeah, the secret things belong, Zoe, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things which are revealed belong to us and our children forever. And that's a beautiful verse. It's amazing to think that we serve a God who doesn't hide things from us. But as a father, I do know that I hide things for my kids. I hide things to draw them into interaction with me. I hide things for them so that I can join them in celebration when they discover my love for them and my goodness as they discover what I've hidden for them. And then anything that we discover in this sort of relationship with the Father, in which he hides things for us, those are things we can't lose. When we discover those treasures, they're for us and for us to give to our children forever. Wow, there's so much going on here in chat. So, yeah, I love that, Susanna. He offends our mind by getting money from a fish. It's so delightfully absurd. And it reminds me of people who, when the Lord seems to be doing strange things today, a lot of people, well-meaning followers of Jesus, will say, "Where's that in the Bible?" And maybe it's not specifically in the Bible. However, at the moment that Jesus did that, there was no example in the Bible of a fish spitting out a coin for a tax. Over and over throughout the scriptures, God would almost be offensive in his absurdity, like this example, or like a donkey speaking. And somehow we think that God is done with surprises. Now that we've got this book, it's got a cover, so we know what the beginning and end is. God's done with surprises. He doesn't do anything new now. And I think that as we journey with him, the delightful discovery that we make is he surprises us all the time. Like my favorite teacher likes to say, God will never contradict his word, but he loves to contradict my understanding of his word. And that's it. I'm out. It has been delightful to be with you guys for another Encounter Daily, and I'll catch you tomorrow.